Nice. Okay, well, there we go. Okay, there you are. Hello, Homa.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, very well.
Okay, that's great. All right. So in this extraordinary life of yours, I don't think I've ever heard of a life that is so profoundly interesting from the point of view of transcultural connections and learning. And it's breathtaking. It just is. It's amazing.
It's in retrospect, this family of 5 moved to Logan, tiny little town, farming town. Most girls would get married right after high school. The joke was that ugly girls only came to university, and as soon as they found a husband, they left. Here we were, very ambitious, wanting to, be educated. All sorts of different dreams and that we had. And actually, it gave us the opportunity that we needed at the time. It's just in its own ways. Logan was very good to our family. I badmouth it sometimes, but that of all places in the United States, we have to end up there. But in a way, it was a good beginning. Another thing that happened in Logan was President Kennedy in 1960. Now, this week we arrived in 1959. In 1960, President Kennedy announced a Peace Corps program. And he wanted young people, instead of going to army or whatever, to go and serve the world. Iran was one of the countries that Peace Corps groups were going to go. My father was teaching Persian. They were people from Army Language School in Monterey that came, and they needed to Logan because the first group was community development and agriculture development, and because Utah State University had 50 years of relationship with the agriculture college with Iran, it was a natural place for them to place it. Now, I am a 17-year-old girl who speaks Persian, and also because I teach French, I know how to teach languages. So they hired me to work with Peace Corps volunteers during the 3 months that they were there to teach them language. And also, in those days, they were teaching all sorts of other things to Peace Corps volunteers that later they realized it was not necessary. They needed to learn about the culture, about the religion, about relationship between men and women, and a variety of other things in Iran. So I became a Peace Corps instructor, and at the end of the program, also they would evaluate whether some of these volunteers they had the stamina, or they would be a good volunteer or not. So there was like a selection program that would also take place. I'm telling you this because later in my life, this model became a base for a company that I formed, and I trained people to go from one culture to another, and the executive programs that I developed in the 70s. But in Logan, we had several of these Peace Corps volunteers. And you know what was wonderful about the volunteers in those days? Donna Shalala was one of the Peace Corps volunteers. They were wonderful people that with heart of gold, that they would interrupt their lives, they would interrupt their comfort just purely to serve humanity, just purely to go to a village and teach English or teach how to have clean water, to have better agriculture. And they would write to me after they would go to the country, and with such romantic notion of the country. They would learn how to read and write Persian. And you know, many volunteers, when they came back, they became professors of Persian studies in variety of universities. So it was such a rich experience to meet these people, to spend 3 months with them. And it was almost like 24 hours a day with language instruction and language lab. And then we ate together, we talked together, and it was quite an interesting experience. Yes. Uh, so the 5 programs of Peace Corps I taught, I enjoyed every one of them. And later I used some of their courses and for my own company. Yes.
Mhm. What was the name of your company?
Transcultural Communication Center.
Oh. And you founded this, is that correct?
I found, yeah, it's interesting. You want me to go chronologically, or can I jump to that?
You can jump anywhere you want or in any way that you want. Okay?
Okay.
Whatever's the best, whatever you care about the most, or not. Don't worry. I'll eventually find a whole set of questions. So
what happened was, after let me go chronologically.
Sure.
After I went to Salt Lake City, Utah, to University of Utah to study my master's in French literature, my hope still was to become an airline hostess from the childhood. If I knew 2 languages and if my waist was 22 inches, I could become an airline hostess. And I did all of that. And my father was not too keen about it, but then he said, well, wait a couple of years, finish your master's in French literature, and then maybe you can do it. When I finished my master's, a school in Pomona, California, offered me a job to teach French. For the first time, I was getting away from family, and it was very, very traumatic for me. I came to Salt Lake City, Utah. From Salt Lake City, I came to California. I had bought a red Mustang that in those days was just new. Loved my car, loaded my clothes in it, and came to teach French. This is 1965. You know, the time of beginning of the hippie movement. California, Pomona colleges are supposed to be very fancy and elite of the country going there. And I would go on the campus and I would see all of these kids in torn jeans and tie-dye clothes and, unwashed hair, and just couldn't understand the hippie movement. The campus was quite an eye-opener to me. And my students also, it was the time of the Beatles. People were asking about Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi, and all of the Indian people and their philosophy. And my students would start talking about me that, I don't like my parents and their values. I want to have new things. And what do you guys in Middle East do? What are you? What do you think? I ended up really not teaching that much French and mostly talking to my students about life and other things. And they were not really interested in learning French that much either. They were just there for fulfilling the requirement and getting a grade and moving on. So I didn't renew my contract after that year. And I said, I went back to Utah. I said, I think I better go into counseling because this is what I enjoy. In those days, psychology was a man's field, and social work, counseling was somewhat of where women were entering that field. So I went and uh, I went to, I took a educational psychology course. And what is interesting was my future husband, who was a New Yorker who had come to Utah, University of Utah had started a program called architectural psychology. And it was actually, concept was interesting, that how the architecture affects psychological well-being of people and the spaces. So he had come for that from New York City. He had finished Boston University and was totally unlike any Mormon. Outgoing, talkative, his mother was Jewish, a painter in New York. His father was an architect from Harvard, and they were communists, and they were just totally different person. He looked at me sitting at the next desk, said, "What are you doing in this class?" I said, "I've come to study psychology." He said, "Women don't study, the women study social work. This is for men." It's interesting. I remember that moment that I said, "I'm going to show you." I had no intention of studying psychology or becoming a PhD in psychology. But when he dared me, it just something snapped in me. That I'm usually not that kind of a person, but something in me said, I'm going to show you. And sure enough, I graduated 4 days ahead of him and both studied psychology and got our PhD in Utah. But he was a great motivator for me, because he would challenge me. He would challenge me in variety of things. And also he represented an area of the world and activities that I was yearning for. I took a course while I was teaching my French literature. An Italian artist professor from Italy came to University of Utah to teach art history, and I took art history. I tell you, Barbara, I have never been that intoxicated, that enamored with something. Every slide he would show, it was exciting for me. I mean, from Caravaggio, from all of the Venice art, from Italian, from Renaissance, I became in love with arts and paintings and history of art through that one course. And when my ex-husband's name was John Snibby, when John would talk about museums in New York, it was to me like, my gosh, could I ever see those museums? He would talk about being a child and being part of the Metropolitan Opera for the kids. And his father being an architect, which is another love of mine, the architecture. And I love buildings and have built 5 houses myself. It was all of the dreams, the theater, the Broadway, all of that was what I dreamed of. So we went to the library, studied our PhD program, wrote our dissertation together. We had one typewriter, one IBM Selectric, which was really fancy with the ball that could self-correct. And I was terrified that my house was, our little apartment was going to burn down and my thesis would wipe out. So I always had a copy of my thesis in the refrigerator so it would not burn.
I have to tell you, so did I.
So it would not burn. And we wrote our dissertations together and finished our work. And I told him, I said, you know, nice little Persian girl, obedient of her husband. You go pick a job anywhere you want in the United States. They offered us a job in Vancouver at University of British Columbia. No, Simon Fraser University, excuse me. But I went to Canada and I thought I would go to Africa before I would go to Canada because I wanted, if there's going to be a culture change, I want it to be a dramatic culture change, not just as subtle. So I said, go anywhere in the United States. But I had two requirements, that go to a grocery store and make sure they have eggplant and yogurt. I thought if a city had those two items in it, it would be cosmopolitan. Fortunately, he found a job at University of Southern California, Department of Psychiatry. And we moved to Los Angeles in July of 1970. And it's interesting, just we went to a cocktail party for his department, and Dr. Felton, who was head of occupational medicine, talked to me and he said, who are you? Persian? What did you, Muslim, Baha'i? You have your PhD in psychology. He said, you're exactly the person I'm looking for. And I said, why? He said, we have a program to study police officers nationally. And we want to do research on developing psychological tests for police officers because so many of them have come back from Vietnam and have been very aggressive or difficult, or we have had problems with them in the police force. They want to have some selection and some psychological screening. And he said, you know, I like you because you were raised in Utah. You don't have all of those preconceived notions about police officers. You come from a different culture. I want somebody that comes without prejudice, basically, to do this program. And he hired me and another psychologist. We had a huge grant in those days, a $5 million grant from law enforcement agency in Washington, D.C., and we collaborated with UCLA. And we developed physiological and psychological screening for police officers in 3 years. Boy, did it teach me. In order to find out what the stressors were on police officers, we had to go and ride with police officers at midnight in places like Watts and in ghettos that really had a lot of problems and find out really what is going on. We dressed as deputy sheriff and went into a jail system of Los Angeles to find out what are the stressors on deputy sheriffs. I did everything. I went on helicopter rides. I tested 500 officers. We interviewed veteran officers that had been part of the force for 20 years. I wrote a paper called They Wore a Badge for 20 Years about police officers who were veteran. We evaluated, like police officers could not have flat feet, they had to have all their teeth because there was some kind of a bullet that they had to use their teeth to pull out. So we changed all of that. We changed all of those criteria, and we lowered the height limitation so they could have more Hispanic, Asian women come to the force. It was a very, very exciting time. And really, our little project made a huge difference nationally. That we were able to change so many things during those 3 years through our little study. And we came up with psychological testing that we said these will be, and they are still using them for selection of police officers. And police psychology became a field. Police departments hired psychologists. In fact, my husband, John Snibby, became police psychologist for Los Angeles Police Department for a while. And John and I wrote a book called The Urban Policeman in Transition, a psychological and sociological review, which is completely sold. And yeah, it was a big hit. Um, so yeah, and by then I was pregnant, and Jason, my son, was born in 1972. My secretary, Jean Bryant, who was my secretary at the time, she started with us with the police department. Was at my house. We were doing the research because we had to give back our offices. Our lease had run out. So I told, at that time I had bought a home. I said, well, come to my house and we will do the research. And sure enough, when I had labor pain with Jason, Jean took me to hospital, and she has been a friend for 50 years of my life, and we have done a lot of things together. It was so interesting because we had to finish the final product of research project and submit all of this to granting agency, and then Jason was born in the middle of this. So I would have people come to my house, and we moved to a new house. In the morning, my husband would leave, and then I had this research assistant who had this fancy green Porsche drive up, and other assistants come, a black woman, a Korean woman, and a white young man come to my house for us to finish the project. And the neighbors later on, they said, we didn't know what kind of a racket you were running at your house in those days, that your husband would leave and all of these people would show up, and they would leave and then your husband would come home. But yeah, Jason was born in this atmosphere, and we finished our project. And my neighbor was Bernice Ideson, is a very famous psychologist in Family Styles Project. She was my neighbor. She walked down the hill to my house one day and said, I hear you're a psychologist. I am doing a project at UCLA called Family Styles Project that is comparing children that are born in regular husband-wife houses, children that are born in communes, hippie communes, children that are, I think they're like people that are not married, but they are bringing children. And we want you to come and be one of the psychologists on this project. And I loved Bernice. She was a wonderful woman. And she and her husband, Sam, were great psychologists and scientists at UCLA. It was an honor to work with them. And I went and started my career at UCLA Department of Psychiatry with her at Family Styles Project. What was interesting was I was the first Iranian woman hired by UCLA.
Mm.
And I am also the first Iranian woman, the first Iranian that studied clinical psychology. And I didn't know that. You know, when you are busy, I didn't know till recently. Somebody said, "Did you know that you were the first one?" I said, "No." But yeah, Bernice took me to UCLA. And the project was a longitudinal project. Then at the same time, something happened that was quite interesting. It became 1974. 72, Jason was born. 70, our project was kind of finished. 74, about Iran started having oil money come flow in, and became extremely wealthy and had a lot of money to do projects and connect with universities and ask for collaboration. So here I am at UCLA, Department of Psychiatry. One day, chairman of department, Dr. Jolly West, calls and says, Homa, you are Iranian, right? I said, yes. Said, well, there are these companies that are interested in working with Iran, and they want UCLA and our department to help them. They're coming here for a meeting. Would you mind coming and sitting in a meeting? I was at psychiatry, and Dr. Amin Banani was in Middle East studies at the time. So Amin Banani also came, and we sat in the meeting with a bunch of people from the department. These people were from Westinghouse Defense Division. And they said, yes, Iran has approached us to send some of our people to Iran for like a couple of years to develop their defense companies and transfer some technology to them. And we want to know if you have a test that you can give our employees before they go, our executives and their families, to know whether they can adapt culturally and they can survive the change, and how would that be? Dr. West said, you know, there is no such test. And UCLA is not interested in business. UCLA is a research and training organization. And kind of closed the meeting. After the meeting, I went to Dr. West and I said, Dr. West, I am really interested in this and I know how to do it. I did it with Peace Corps and I am really love to do it. Do you mind if I contact Westinghouse? And I won't do it during the time of you. I will do it on the weekends and I would show you what I'm going to do. He said, there's no problem. As long as you take care of your research work with Bernice, there is no problem. So I sat up that night. I remember distinctly. I sat in my bed and I wrote the proposal that we will have a 3-day conference, the 3-day training, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And on Monday morning, we will tell them yes, no, maybe on people that could go, could not go, or maybe. And we will teach 6 hours of language training, 6 hours of cultural training, and 6 hours of kind of culture shock, psychological issues, and other things. Wrote it all right up, and I went to Westinghouse, and I said, I will do it for you. I have experience with Peace Corps. By the fifth program, we knew what worked and what didn't work as far as training is concerned. We are not going to be the Chamber of Commerce of Iran. We're going to be the truth of what are the stressors and what are the difficult things. And so, sure enough, the Transcultural Communication Center was born. And I hired my brother and his wife to teach the Persian language. John, my husband, was teaching some of the psychological stressors. We talked about culture shock. We talked about, and also Hughes Aircraft came. And after a while, my brother and I, wrote a book on Persian dialogues, and we made cassette tapes on pronunciation and speaking language. So by the time these people were trained through us, they had, like a Berlitz book on Persian language, so they could order a meal and go on a taxi and do a variety of things. They had some glimpse of what the culture was like. They had some idea about culture shock of, at first being honeymoon and then going through depression and then coming back up and hating what they are doing. We talked about what they should pack. I said, don't ever pack anything that is a family heirloom or something that you never want to lose. And after revolution happened, so many of them said, Homa, that was the best advice you gave us, because we almost had to jump on the plane with the shirt on our backs. And also we talked to the women and children. I required that all women and children over 12 should come and attend the class. Interestingly enough, I couldn't go to the companies because I didn't have the security clearance, and all of these places were security facilities. So downstairs of my house was quite large. We connected 3 rooms into a seminar room, and Hughes Aircraft sent me all of the desks and chairs and blackboard, and they would come on Friday morning, and we would take them to a Persian restaurant at night. And on Monday morning, I would say yes, no, maybe, and give them all the books and everything for them to take with them to Iran. Yes.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. Amazing.
So that's and then afterwards, when the revolution happened, and a lot of Iranians were coming here, then we did the cross-cultural training reverse way, how to adapt to American culture. And we did it for a lot of companies in the United States. And also the cross-cultural women's studies were part of like a thread that went throughout my career. Because what happened as women entered organizations, it almost was a cross-cultural experience. They came from 2 different cultures. As organization hired Egyptian manager and Indian worker and Hispanic secretary, and the multicultural organization and their expectation and their cultural background affected the organization. So whether it was men, women, authoritarian culture, democratic culture, so we talked about all of that, and we worked with many, many, many organizations, and it was really a lot of fun, a lot of fun. Yeah.
Wow. Transcending stereotypes.
Yes.
That's what I think I'm hearing over and over and over and over. Moving around the world, really, and moving around what becomes your own sense of identifying what you think is really important. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes, of course.
And
Well, and a sense of curiosity about different culture. Barbara, I remember when we were coming to United States, my father took me to a travel agency. I'd never seen a travel agency before that. To pick up our tickets for the ship, the USS United States. As I walked into that room, it was a small room, it had Eiffel Tower, it had Big Ben, it had Mount Fuji, it had I don't know, the cross maybe in Brazil or some of these landmarks. And I said, you know, one day I'm gonna see all of this. I am gonna go to every one of these. You know, this is little girl in Tehran. And I've always loved travel and seeing all of the going all of the places and seeing different things. And whenever the opportunity has come, I have done that. Yeah.
So you're a person who goes around to change about stereotypes and how they work. And it's like you made a world for yourself that enabled you to help many, many people transcend stereotypes. And you could know so much when there was something that was transcending stereotypes because you knew the other side of all complex cultural habits. It truly, the concept of transcending stereotypes. I'm going to do something I don't usually do with these kinds of things.
Please
But
do.
I edited a book,
Yes.
Transcending Stereotypes.
Ah,
Yeah. And that was about, yeah, it's very interesting. It's for another day. but it's so, the reason it's very hard to try to change something so profoundly, which is what you're doing almost every bit of your adult life. What needs changing? What needs doing? But there's a double thing going on. At least I may have this all wrong. So just, say it,
Grammy, I hate to interrupt you. We're going to get cut off by Zoom momentarily. So before we get too deep into this, we're going to need to refresh, and I'm very sorry about that.
I will leave.
Okay, I'll send a new link out. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
We all will leave.